Well, today was an interesting day. I traveled to Massachusetts. I had never been to Massachusetts before, just a little corner just south of New Hampshire, to go on a date. And as it turned out, it was a gentleman who described himself as a very liberal student in a liberal arts college, and it was a very interesting exchange. Some of you will realize some of my earliest videos carry the title "Conversations or Talk with a Liberal." um, Dealing with lengthy conversations that I'd had with other liberals, and this definitely fell into that category. Although I feel like, given my background, it wasn't really much of a fair fight. I pushed him pretty far down the road, and this wasn't the intent. We were on a date. I wasn't preaching the whole time, but the conversation eventually turned to politics and the differences between our beliefs and the ramifications of some of my beliefs. And I feel confident that I was actually able to convince this guy that public schools, welfare, abortion, and the drug war were all wrong. I was most proud of public education. That's such a red herring, but just using some of the information from John Taylor Gatto, um, you know, it's easy to argue against it on using liberals' own logic and liberals' own biases, especially regarding the ineffectiveness of how it treats poor people and minorities, how it centralizes power in the hands of a few, how it diminishes democracy, the centralization of school districts from one-room schoolhouses to very large districts, reduces the relative amount of power that individuals have over the school. And all these things really resonated him. The idea that there's a class system. He objected. Well, if we didn't have a government, there would be a class system. It's very easy to point out there's a class system now. And it's just ironic because this is a guy who lived next to George Soros' kid in college. Um, and to his credit, he didn't deny this. He's aware that the political elite, they don't send their kids to public school. He's aware that there's an elite cadre of private schools, although he doesn't know too much about them, and he's thinking more at the collegiate level than anything else. Um, but to keep reemphasizing, there already is a class system, and there isn't upward social mobility the way that there was prior to the public schools. Um, anyway, that was interesting, but that's not the main point of this video. Um, Driving back, when I re-entered New Hampshire, of course there is the "Welcome to New Hampshire" sign, and then the motto underneath the sign, "Live free or die." And I'm always struck at the rhetorical strength of that motto, and that's not to suggest that everyone in the state or most people in the state live up or measure up to that motto. I guess it would be plain to say that I don't, and probably nobody literally does if we're going to accept a certain definition of freedom. Um, that's debatable, I guess. But um, the the non-compromising uh, extremism of that motto is quite striking. And even if it's only rhetorical, it's a big difference. And this kind of got me thinking more and more about advocacy for the Free State Project. That's something that I'm very, very reluctant to do. I've made one video previously kind of about it, and mostly it's been questioning and concerns that I have about some of the activism that goes on in New Hampshire, and those concerns certainly remain. And but the main reason I don't come out and fully start, uh, I don't know, advocating that people move here in mass is because um, I'm not comfortable with that kind of marketing. I think advocating that people do this or that or buy this or that is something that I can't ethically do. I mean, I think it's okay. Like, I don't have anything against advertising, but for me, to tell someone that they need to do this or that when I don't know all the details about their life, I don't know what their situation is, I don't know what the cost would be to them, I don't know what they would be giving up, I don't know what their personal preferences is. there are people who, even if they are libertarian for whatever reason, living in New Hampshire might be a hell. Maybe they really hate the weather that bad, or there's some other cultural thing, or maybe they love Starbucks coffee, and the fact that Dunkin' Donuts rules this place with an iron fist would be, really bad for them, and I don't understand that, and so, I can't. I have a hard time myself advocate, and this isn't just about the Free State Project. When I've had sales jobs in the past, I really am not good at it because I'm really honest about I don't know what your needs are. I much prefer when people come to you wanting to buy something that you're selling, and then okay, I can help you out if I already know that you've decided to make the decision that you want this. Here I can give you advice, and so I shy away from a blanket recommendation that people come here because I don't know what all of your circumstances are. Many of you have families, many of you have jobs that are very important to you. Many of you are in college, and whatever qualms we might have about the higher education system or the lower education system for that matter. You have sunk costs put into it. It may be a necessary part of an integral plan. I don't know. A lot of you are foreigners. I was just talking to one of my subscribers from Iceland for quite a long time, and what does it take for a foreigner to say come to the United States? It's not necessarily very easy, especially for long term um, uh, settling. And it's part of me wants it's very difficult. Part of me wants it because I there's self-interest in here. I mean, I think the more, and I've said this more generally about the United States, like I've told a lot of foreign people over the years, come to the United States. I know it's not Libertopia, and if you're a libertarian in another country, you know the United States is not Libertopia. Libertarians in other countries tend to know more about the United States than just about any other foreign people, because so much libertarian literature comes from the United States and is about the United States, especially problems with its government, that if you're a libertarian in Germany or the UK or Australia, an enormous volume of the stuff that you read is very US-centric and informative critiques, very, very powerful critiques of the US system. Like when I was talking to this liberal today, he admitted that he had never heard critiques of the US system like that before, that it was extremely interesting and thought-provoking, and that he had no kind of rebuttal at all. Nothing in his years of being liberal and having these positions prepared him for that kind of indictment. And yet, if you're a libertarian in another country, chances are you've been hearing that kind of stuff about the United States for however long you've been a libertarian. So I realize foreigners, especially foreign libertarians, don't have any illusions about the political state in the United States. That said, I don't know a place that's on net better. Now, in specific circumstances, sure, there can be differences. If you're in a position where the U.S. government actually wants to get you, in particular, I totally understand. Or if you have a job or whatever, I understand. But I always advocate, if they can, I wish. And it's selfish. The more like-minded people that I can get anywhere more proximate to me than they already are, the better. And to the United States generally, or to New Hampshire in particular. But again, it's a qualification, and it's also the realization that I can't say this and I won't say this with any kind of implication of an obligation, because there is none. I've had lots of people tell me over the years, the purpose of my life is not to advance libertarianism. I am a libertarian. I believe in it. My personal goals in life are to be happy, or to raise a family, or any number of other completely inobjectable, laudable goals. And sure, a libertarian society would be better, and something I'd advocate and maybe work towards to some degree, but it's not something that I'm willing to dedicate my life to. And to be honest, the fact that you moved to New Hampshire does not mean you're dedicating your life to bringing about liberty necessarily. There's a few activists, a very few, who it literally consumes almost all of their time, all of their wealth, all of their mental effort, everything. That's a very small group of people, even within those who have actually moved. That is a burden that I would not place on myself or anyone else. But to go along with that point, I also say that moving to New Hampshire doesn't necessitate that. Moving to the United States doesn't necessitate that. It just puts you in a position that if you want to engage in activism, and I use that in the broadest sense, the opportunities to do so are pretty varied, and they keep cropping up. There's a constant stream of potential things that you could be doing at so many levels. And as I've said in previous videos, I have major misgivings and qualms about the effectiveness or the advocacy or the efficacy of any number of these. The civil disobedience, I think it's mostly miss. It's possible to get a hit there. That's not what's by and large happening, but it's not impossible. But I wouldn't say people have to do that, and most free staters aren't engaging in civil disobedience, at least to the kind where they're getting arrested. There's political activism. And as an anarchist, I certainly have misgivings about how effective that is. My moral objections don't go that deep because, I think it's defensible to seize the gun out of the hand of he who oppresses you. I realize the moral hazard. I mean, we're talking about the ring of power here, essentially, or something, or not literally the ring of power, but I think literally the ring of power was a metaphor for the power we're talking about. Like we can use that as a metaphor, I think, because the private property anarchist Tolkien, I really do believe, if not even, perhaps it wasn't conscious, and there's probably greater, I know there are greater Tolkien experts out there than me because I'm not one at all, but the degree to which that analogy holds is stunning. When I first, thought of that, and I don't know if I was the first one. I'm sure I wasn't. Um, I was like, that is exactly what the Ring of Power is. It's a metaphor for the corruption of power that politics entails, and but whatever there is a great deal of political activism here. The ability to get elected to the state house is actually considerably easier than was led to believe before I came here. For multiple reasons, it's a state with a relatively small population, but a very large house. So, the number of constituents per seat is something like 7,000 or 3,000, something. It's in the low thousands. The pay for the house is only $100 a year. It's essentially a part-time position, and there are free state anarchists who have been elected to the legislature, and the only thing that they did was pay the registration fee for $5, $10, something like that. And so there are anarchists who ran as Democrats and anarchists who ran as Republicans, not to mention people who are minarchists who are in the state house. The number is relatively small, but then the political organizations, the political arm of the Free State Projects, the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, and a couple others, have enormous influence within the GOP within the state. That magnifies the power of and the influence of the movement, even if the fact that a large part, I'd say at this point, potentially a majority of the members are actually anarchists, at least philosophical anarchists. Where I don't claim to know how this will pan out or what it will lead to, I have a very hard time seeing it as wholly negative or something to be totally worried about. It seems like of all the political alignments you would want to see in a state government, a powerful libertarian anarchist one, it's certainly the least of the evils I can imagine in the scenario as it is. So there's that. There's a couple other things. Of course, there's a lot of Liberty Media. I had the opportunity yesterday to travel to Keene and visit the Free Talk Live studios. It was Sunday, so they weren't doing a show right when I was there. Briefly met Ian Friedman, did not really talk to him. Just kind of got to look around us. It's very odd when you've been watching Free Keene and Ridley and all the media emanating from Keene for years and years now. It's kind of like going to the set of a movie. It's a place that looks familiar to you. And even though these people aren't necessarily famous in the mainstream media, they are essentially celebritarians, and it is a little odd to see them in real life, although having been to PorcFest now twice, you kind of get over that to a certain extent. Um, but, you witness that activism, which again, I'm not saying I endorse all of it, but it's just very interesting. And I think, from what I can tell, Ian Friedman is in the category of people who, like, he is completely dedicated to, pursuing his view of a free society. Completely, he's put his entire life, and even if I don't necessarily agree with his exact vision or everything he's done to it, it's hard for me not to respect that. And he's not alone, although it's not the most, like I said, it's an elect minority. Um, and then last night I went to a Bitcoin meeting in which there were at least a few, I'm told, I don't know all the spicy details, but at least a few so-called Bitcoin barons, or people who are essentially the number of Bitcoins they have placed them in the millionaire category. Um, and that's very interesting. Also, Michael Huemer's brother was there. It's very odd. So, Michael Huemer, who's written what I consider the top 3 libertarian books of all time, his little brother, who looks essentially just like him plus a mustache, is running around. And I realize it's the brother or whatever, but it is a little bit surreal. Um, so, uh, you know, there's so many different avenues, and not just of activism, but of socializing, of learning. There are more intellectual things. I have a lot of subs from New York City. I know that there's a very significant, very interesting, very intelligent anarcho-capitalist clique in New York City. I've met many of them at PorcFest. I'm friends with many of them on Facebook. And I will say, one thing that I've noticed as being, surprising me is that there isn't as much intellectualism in the Free State Project as I would have assumed. Something I noticed at PorcFest. I mean, I understand someone smoking a lot of pot. I would assume that they would be reading a lot too, and that assumption would not be correct all of the time. Be correct some of the time, but not all the time. That's not to say that the libertarians in the Free State Project are anti-intellectual. It's not what I would expect. And I think there's a certain degree of, I'm in my own bubble. I talked about the libertarian echo chamber. The kind of videos and the content that I put out, it's really, really esoteric compared to most libertarian media. Um, it's going into minutia, and not really so much about libertarian theory. If you really want to go into that, you've got to start reading things like Human Action and Man, Economy, and State, and maybe listening to lectures from some of these guys. But it's it's attractive to people who are interested in that. There's two. It seems like there's two kinds. There are people who are really into the historical minutia, and then people who really just hate liberals, just like I do. That seems to be who I resonate the most with, and most of the people on this channel seem to be like that. And I've noticed that the interest in the Free State Project is relatively tepid, as far as I can tell from most of my subscribers. A few people have come in and asked, sincere questions about it, but not many. Um, at the Bitcoin meeting, I met another YouTuber, one who I'm not really too familiar with. What is he called? I think he's called the Voluntarist Rebel or the Anarcho-Capitalist Rebel. He had just moved from Chicago, and he's essentially dedicated his entire Facebook existence to promoting the Free State Project. Like, everything he does, he records, posts on Facebook, and he's like, "This is what I'm doing now. This is what I'm doing now." And he's very much marketing it, which again I've expressed. I have very serious qualms about doing that, about telling people to come here when I don't know their background, what their values are, what their priorities are. Um, but I was interested to see that many people, he was going through and showing me the responses that many people, and it's selective because there's probably people who aren't commenting, I'm sure there are are very interested, asking them all kinds of questions. Where can I move? How can I move? Can you help me? What is this like? What is that like? And I think that there was I don't want to say I was upset, but I was noticing there seems to be a difference between the degree of interest from his social sphere of libertarians and mine. Although In my defense, I will say that I have not been, like, I never made a Facebook announcement that I was moving here. I never made a YouTube video announcing that I was going to move here. I kind of did it and then came back on with mono and said that I'd moved, which is maybe not the best, billboard for liberty, I guess. Um, but again, another part is not. I'm not skeptical in the sense that I think the Free State Project is bad or I have any net negative view of it. I mean, the things that could be said about PorcFest, I think, could be said about New Hampshire. And from a libertarian perspective, it's literally unreal. It's surreal. It's like the only equivalent would be like going maybe to the Mises Institute or the Property and Freedom um, thing that Hoppe puts on, and Bottom Turkey, where you're just, except it's to that, it's maybe not quite that intense, but it's every day, all the time, and it's just there's nothing comparable to it, and that's not necessarily to say that it's great or that it's for everybody, but it's really, really interesting. It really makes you think. It makes you consider, well, what will this work? Will this not work? What if anything, should I be doing? Again, I don't believe in obligations. I don't think I'm obligated, and this is the crowd to make that argument to. But you know, even though I don't feel obligated, I'm interested. Not only do I like the idea of advancing a libertarian society for its own sake and for the benefit I think it will give other people, it's also an activity that's worth doing. It's like a helix sport. It's a challenge. It's a way to both socialize, make friends, but also challenge yourself. It's a great task, which people need, I think. I mean, it's not. They don't need it in the deontological sense. I'm not saying that people have to have a cause. You don't have to have a cause, but having a cause and working towards it, it can be very fulfilling. It is for me anyway, and it is for a lot of other people. Although some people just like to smoke pot and sit around all the time. And of course they're free to do that, but not my cup of tea. So I don't know. I have a very kind of mixed. It's kind of a tepid endorsement slash, qualification that I don't think it's an obligation kind of thing. Another interesting story. My roommate approached me last week and he said, "Hey, do you want to go to Dartmouth?" Which I've never been to Dartmouth. I was not really doing anything, and I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "Well, Jason Sorens, who is the guy who came up with the idea of the Free State Project. At the time, he was a student at Yale. He's now a professor at Dartmouth, and Dartmouth has a libertarian club, and they were going to do they do a presentation every week on different aspects of libertarianism. They were doing one on the Free State Project, and for some reason that I still don't understand why, Sorens could not attend the meeting, and he called my roommate and said, "Do you want to go there and talk about the Free State Project?" Why? It wasn't clear to me, and when I asked my roommate, he said he wasn't clear how his number became the one that Sorens called. In any event, we pulled over there, and we met with these college libertarians at Dartmouth. And it was very interesting. It was a good mix. It wasn't as racially pure as some of the cliches would hold to be true. From what I could tell, ideologically, the two co-presidents were both Rothbardian anarcho-capitalists. The others tended to be, I think, a little bit more minarchist. And then there was one guy who identified as a leftist. He agreed with libertarians on foreign policy, markets, and guns, which is a pretty comprehensive list, but he also said he agreed with Noam Chomsky on a lot of things. Didn't really get the chance to talk with him that much. But what was interesting also, they were all from out of state too. None of them were New Hampshire natives. I didn't know where. I know one was from New York. I don't know where the rest were. But what was really interesting there, and this is kind of a different topic, but I asked them, because I was describing how there's been an explosion in the libertarian movement and its size. This is correlating and probably related to, perhaps reciprocally related to the Ron Paul presidential campaigns. that prior to this, there were many fewer libertarians than there are today, and they were certainly less. There's less of a network for them to interact with each other. And I asked, how many of you became libertarians because of the Ron Paul movement? And it was zero. It was none of these people, and there were probably 20 people in the room. These guys were all, I think, freshmen and sophomores, and they were so young that they really were too young to have been, at least directly, the result of the Ron Paul revolution. Now, indirectly, it'd be very hard to argue that they couldn't possibly be, because of just how many people sprang out of that or got active because of that, how much material is generated now as an indirect ripple effect. But even though they all knew who Ron Paul was, none of them had seen the debates and watched a YouTube video or read a book and moved on that way. So that's interesting. I have quite a few videos on Ron Paul, which are very likely my most dated videos. But on the other hand, it almost seems like a historical kind of record at this point, because we're in a post Ron Paul revolution world, which really struck me home. It really was like, wow, we really are well past that at this point. It's only been 2 years, right, since that election, 3 years since it was really an active primary thing. But for 3 years is a long time, the development of a young person. If these people are 18 or 19 now, that's going back to when they were 15 or 16. That's pretty young to be into politics. There's a few people who are like that. I can think of a few YouTubers who were coming out for Paul when they were 13 or 14, but not very many. And those guys are all in their 20s now. Those guys, and or potentially girl maybe. So I thought that was very interesting. They were all very interested in the Free State Project. Not necessarily going to move there. I don't know. We won't get. Again, I wasn't there to advocate that they join. Just to kind of give. I don't know why. It was very odd. You just get asked, "Well, do you want to go to Dartmouth today?" And it's like, I've never been to Dartmouth. Why don't I go and see what happens? So very interesting. I can't even really begin to list all of the little things that have taken place that make you think for a second, that you notice, that your eyes narrow and your brain starts to work on. But it is a very interesting experience, and if people are on the fence, or they're really, really curious, I think that PorcFest really is a very good way to kind of get a taste. Now, every day being in the Free State Project is not like every day at PorcFest. PorcFest is hyper intense, relatively speaking, and it has other elements where you have all these lectures, all this other kind of stuff. But it gives you more or less the same flavor, just maybe amped up a little bit with the nicer surroundings, although you could certainly move up to Lancaster if that's what you wished. But if anyone has any questions, you can ask me. I certainly don't claim to be an expert. But the community is very welcoming. Every time you go, you get introduced as a new mover. You shake a lot of hands. A lot of small talk conversations, which, for me, they kind of surprise me. Even though I'm a new mover, I'm relatively speaking old hat when it comes to libertarianism. There are people here who are much older. I mean, there are people who've been libertarians as long as I've been alive or longer. So there's a bell curve, and I'm not at the end by any means. Since I've kind of been calling myself an ANCAP now for almost 10 years, and that was at the end of a 10-year kind of gradual devolution from absolute statist to radical minarchist. It's something that I'd spent most of my life kind of believing in. Ron Paul was kind of like a bookend. It seems that way now. It's not going to seem that way forever, because it's going to recede into the past. I jokingly asked if they would all become libertarians because of Rand Paul, which I guess they thought was funny because they all laughed. But none of them had become libertarians because of Rand Paul, which may be the greatest weakness between him and his father, besides being more of a hawk, although that's debatable. Different question. So I know this is a bit of a ramble. I'm very, very cautious about explicitly advocating, people move, but it is interesting. It's worth considering at the very least. I know people have a lot in their personal lives that they have to juggle, and I'm not making any assumptions about what they need to do, only that maybe they think about it, which is probably since I would probably advocate that for just about anything. I don't know if that really counts as an endorsement, but um, it is. There's a certain degree of invigoration. Like I'm kind of not looking forward to the day that I have to return to work, which apparently is approaching. Um, I'll be able to return, but the idea of leaving for several weeks um, is not that appealing, even though it's now been some time since I've worked. Um, so, and maybe that's telling. You know, if I'm reluctant to even leave, even though it's been, gosh, this is the longest I've gone without working ever since I started working, essentially, which has now been 12 years at least, 13, 14 years, sorry. Um, maybe that's a better indicator than anything that I've said. Or maybe I've just become lazy. That's also possible. I mean, apparently I don't have time to shave anymore. I don't know what this is about anyway. I haven't felt the need. So anyway, that's pretty much it for now. We'll see. I'm reading some books now that I'm going to want to do videos on to give you a kind of a preview. This is what I'm on right now. Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. That'll be my next banned video. I have one banned video, or flagged. It's about the Holocaust. That one will be flagged also. I can guarantee. I could make a video about it now, but I'm going to wait until I finish reading it because I'm sure there's lots of juicy details about Zionism that I would just love to share with the rest of you. Some people have asked if I'm still doing the China series. I am still doing the China series. I'm halfway through a biography on Mao, and just communism killing people is so depressing that a lot of times I can't finish books that are about communism all at once. And so, hey, this is sound terrible, but to take a break from communism, I'm reading a book on Zionism. If it gives you any idea, the West Bank and Gaza uh, is considered relaxation compared to Mao, but it really is, relatively speaking. I don't know who that's more of an indictment against. Well, obviously Mao, but yes, I will be getting to that after I read the book on Mao, which will also have probably a video. I will get back into the Ming. I've started the Ming, but I've got to finish them and then go on from there. I had to make some very hard decisions about which books to bring when I moved here. I could not bring them all. They would literally not fit in my truck. I didn't count, but I think I probably have about 100 here. And before I'm able to return home to Michigan, um, I highly doubt that I will have finished them all before then. I think I'll be able to retrieve even more before I finish the ones that I brought. But yeah, that was my most tricky decision, to decide which ones I'm going to prioritize. Also, it also is kind of good. It makes you prioritize what do you want to read. But I still get people, I still get people calling and telling me that I got to read this or that. I was talking to somebody and they asked if I had read Anarchy State and Utopia by Robert Nozick, and although I know what that book is and I know some things about Nozick, I have not read it. And I'm sure it would be good to read, but right now I'm about 800 books behind, so I don't know when I'm ever going to get there, if ever. I will try. Actually, I should probably end this video so I can keep reading Max Blumenthal's book. But anyway, that's pretty much it, and I'll talk to you all another time. Good night.